Alright, so I'm just having a conversation with Neo here, and Truth joined in. Neo was gonna share his testimony a little bit, his story about how he went from being a militant atheist, that's how he described himself before, to now being a Christian. So he's been a Christian for about 5 or 6 years, and I just wanted to ask him about his conversion story because um, I don't know. I hear what he what he describes as militant atheists. They're very, very confident, and so it just seems interesting to me that somebody who is really confident in their atheism could change their mind and become a Christian. So, Neo, you can take it away from there and just tell us your story.
Go ahead. I want to say what's up to my brother Truce Speller real quick if he wanted to say anything about me to, just to. A lot of people on here have heard my story before. Truce Speller was one of them. I just, eventually I want to, have him, just kind of clarify anything that I may have messed up. But a lot of stuff in my life, man, has changed me so much you wouldn't believe it. I used to think the exact opposite the way I do today. And one of the people on here that gets me the most is Truth Butler himself. Because I think my testimony means a lot to some people and even my mother, but Truth Speller like knows a lot about me. Truth, you there? You know what I'm saying? And this stuff is, I'm telling you in confidence that just to have a third party here to testify to what I've been through. He has seen some of the stuff I've been through. I dare not show it live because I don't want to see people, trying to attack me personally over it. But if I could have a testament to what I've been through for one of my friends at least, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's yeah. For Neo goes on his thing, I just say um, what I like about Neo is he's really had some tough. If you hear his story and you see, and I've seen some video footage of different things. I think that's what he's talking about in private. Um, he's been through a lot of tough, painful, hard things, but he's got a great sense of humor and he loves life. Um, I would imagine it's his perspective on God that uh, and his faith that makes him be that way. He's a great person. Neo's one of my favorite people. I'll say that.
All right, that's enough brown nosing. Anyway,
Yeah, enough butter on your roll, man.
I was just telling you that, yeah, the truth scene what I went through, there are a lot of people on here that I've showed them the things on YouTube and whatever. I have a separate channel called One Man Alone with God, if you ever check it out. I don't want to show everybody like my stuff live, or I would feel like I'm boasting. Um, uh, so I'll take care of you 1 second. My boy is having a headache. I gotta get him some medicine. But what I was saying is, I used to be hardcore. Like when I say hardcore militant atheist, I mean like I used to hate God. I used to hate everything about Jesus Christ. I mean, I used Jesus Christ as a curse word as many times as I could. Uh, I think that I hated God because I wouldn't believe that He could put me in the position that I was in. Have you guys ever felt like that?
I haven't, but my wife has, and a lot of people close to me have thought the same exact thought through different situations that they've been in. It's definitely a sentiment that I think a lot of people can relate to for sure. Um, Especially, I've heard a lot of people dealing with depression and they stop believing in God because they feel like God either hates them or he just doesn't exist. So I definitely understand. I definitely understand, how that leads people to atheism. Even, I mean, I understand how that leads people to like militant kind of atheism. Sure.
It's like, okay, I got into a motorcycle accident. I shattered my arm and my leg. My helmet had a 2-inch gash deep thing in it. Everybody kept telling me I'm lucky to be alive. God saved you. You should be thankful that you're still alive. And I hated it. I resented it. People kept telling me that, and I was like, no, that's not true. God didn't save me. Physics saved me, or whatever, or it's like, it doesn't matter. You don't need God involved. I just bounced the right way to where I was alive. It had nothing to do with God. And the thing was, is the amount of surgery I had to go through all of the years, the things that it just eventually I started to, I felt like a guinea pig. I was like, am I really having to go through all this crap? I would scream out one of the first nights, and then the nights that I woke up after a morphine coma. They put me in a morphine coma for 6 months. Almost 6 months I was in a morphine coma. They put me in traction and suspended me off of the bed. Everything was in my body, my ribs were shattered also. The film in between your ribs, that was torn. That little tiny film. You know how you ever eat pork ribs? You ever eat ribs and there's that film? Usually you take
Yeah.
the film off. Yeah. Yeah. That film was torn like all throughout. It hurt so bad that just a little twitch of me moving would send me in such insane pain without morphine that I would be screaming all night. They said I screamed for like months, for a month straight. I was screaming at night in pain,
Wow.
screaming, and finally after all that, my sisters. I have 2 sisters. And I would yell out every night for 2 months. I was yelling out, "Why, God? Why would you do this to me? Why, God?" Crying, bawling my eyes out. "Why, God? Why would you do this to me?" My sisters were crying next to me. They said, "I don't know. I don't know why God would do this to you." Well, it was the most hurtful. I didn't. My parents weren't Christian. Nobody ever taught me to be Christian. I was crying out to a God that I had never met, had never had any connection to whatsoever. Just crying out to something out there. Help me, stop this pain. I had never known God yet. Nobody taught me to be Christian. Nobody taught me about Jesus Christ. Nobody taught me about anything. And for
Mm-hmm.
years and years and years after that, I think until I was 30 years old, that happened when I was 15. 15. It took me 15 years to stop blaming him for what happened. 15 years later,
Mm-hmm.
I finally stopped yelling at him and telling him that I hate him.
So did you just get tired of fighting, or was there
No,
something that happened?
the funny thing is I ended up in a wheelchair for the second time in my life. I had dislocated the knee that I shattered in the motorcycle accident when I was 15. So 15 years later, I think I was 29 when it happened in 2012. Um, 2012, it was Christmas, and I was moving boxes around. I was working for Edible Arrangements, if you ever heard of them. They make.
Oh yes.
I used to deliver. I was the delivery man, and getting in and out of the van sent my knee that I had been walking on for 15 years without problem. All of a sudden, that knee just gave out. Not on the job, but I went home after I felt it going out on the job, and I said, "I got to go home. I got to stop working." It was on Christmas. And they said, "Okay, you can go home because you've got pre-existing conditions. We don't want you to have a work incident. We'd rather
Yeah.
keep our record clear." I went home that night. I snapped my knee right out of the socket.
Oh.
In fact, I snapped it so bad that I couldn't
Oh.
walk for 2 years.
Oh my
Doctor
gosh.
said, you're not going to walk for 2 years. I had to
Wow.
call my job that night, and I said, by the way, I'm not going to be at work tomorrow. And they said, why? And I said, I mean, tomorrow, like 2 years, I'm not going to be there.
Wow.
They flipped out. They were like, Neo, you're one of the most important people we have here. What are we going to do without you? They flipped out on me. They called me for 30 days after that, calling me back to work,
Huh.
not really realizing how severe the situation was. I tore every tendon in my knee. There was nothing left. There's nothing. There's nothing for me to stand on. You know what I'm saying? There's no ligaments or anything to support standing.
So when this first happened, were you still
You know what's funny?
angry?
I was putting away Christmas boxes in the garage when it happened.
When your knee gave out?
Yeah.
So when that happened, did you just get angry at God in that moment?
Yeah, I still was an atheist at that point.
Yeah.
Man, did I see back when I was 15? That's what I was talking about, crying and screaming out to God, stuff like that, and I blamed Him ever since then for what happened. Um, 15 years later, 29 years old, this thing on Christmas happens in 2012. About what was it? 4 years ago now? Maybe 5 years? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say I say
Well,
5 because in my mind it feels like 5. You know what I'm saying? It's like maybe I had been considering God in that year before, you know. So anyway, something happened. A miracle happened. My doctors, they were amazed. They said, "How did you get out of your wheelchair in 6 months? How did you start walking? Because you're not supposed to be walking right now."
Mm-hmm.
That's
So,
what changed. That's. I prayed to God. I said, "Get me out of this wheelchair. I'm going to kill myself if you keep me in this wheelchair." And I didn't test God. I told him. I want to believe onto you and your Son Jesus Christ. I'm not going to test you. If you could take me out of this wheelchair, God, just the same way that Jesus Christ used to heal the lame, the same way. And I read every part of the Bible. And I said, do what you did to them, do it to me. And He did.
mm-hmm.
And I didn't command it. It was just my time. Maybe I was one of the elect at that time. You know what I'm saying? Maybe He had already predestined me to rise out of the wheelchair. Who knows? But something happened at that point that no person on the planet could ever take away from me ever again. Nobody can ever tell me that that didn't happen. There's not, even my doctors are defied. They're like, hey, if that's what it took for you to get out of that wheelchair, that's what it took. They will not disagree with me. They're not going to bill me or anything. You know, they don't care about the money. They cared about me getting out of the wheelchair. You know what I'm saying? They thought that I wouldn't walk for a long time. They
Yeah.
kept telling me, you're not going to walk for a long time. You might as well give up trying to get out of that wheelchair.
Right.
It's only going to hurt you more. You're going to keep ripping ligaments and tendons. It's not going to work. And I did it, and I did it over and over every day. And I prayed to God, and I said, take me out of this wheelchair right now. Truth Speller's seen the videos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Truth, you there?
Oh, I think you might have stepped away.
Yeah. But I got videos on YouTube.
No, yeah, I did see that video, yeah. Yes.
And man, that you don't realize how bad that hurt me. That I was crying. I was on the floor crying. That hurt me so bad. But for me to
Yeah.
get out of that wheelchair and pray to God, I said, "Thank you, God. Thank you for taking me out of this wheelchair." That was Him. There's no. my doctors couldn't have done it. My doctor said there's no way. The only thing that took you out of that wheelchair was your faith in God and Jesus Christ. They all agree. They're like, a lot of them are atheists too. They
Mm.
don't believe in. They just believe in science. One of my doctors told me, I don't really believe in what you believe, but whatever you did, I can't explain, and I can't bill you for it.
Mm.
That's what he told me.
So,
I wish I
you
could show
hated.
the
So
video.
you
I'll show
hated.
the video offline. I'm not going to show the video online, but man,
Yeah,
you
it's
won't
fine.
believe what I went through trying to get out of that wheelchair.
Mm-hmm. So, pretty much what happened is you hated God, and you really hated God for the really tough situations that you were in. And then when this last thing happened that was just so terrible, um, you decided, God, I'm just gonna give you a chance here to prove me wrong.
Yeah, I
And
gave him everything. I gave him my all. I gave everything, all of my life, everything, my soul, everything that I could have to give, even though it is worthless. I'm like filthy rags.
yeah,
I said, if I can give you filthy rags, just turn them new.
so
Do whatever you do with my filthy rags. Just turn them new. Please change me. Change me or destroy me. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be me anymore.
mm,
You know who I am. Change me into who you want me to be, because you know who I really am. You know who my heart is. God, you know my heart. You know I've been living this false life the whole time. You know, you ain't nothing. I'm nothing compared to you. Yeah.
so I mean, it's obviously a pretty radical change that's taken place. Um,
Yeah,
but I
before
had a
I
question
used to
about
be
your
like,
atheism.
God, you can't change me. I'm better than you. I could be you. That's what.
So when you were an atheist, so I know that you were an atheist in part because of your own suffering. Was that like the main thing, or were there other reasons why you were an atheist at that time?
I mean, yeah, I was going through a lot of stuff. My mother used to incur daily abuse by my stepfather. My stepfather used to beat me every day.
Mm,
Um, he was Jewish. We were German, coincidentally.
mm,
He believed in his Jewish belief. Not saying anything against Judaism, but
well, yeah, I mean,
my mother
just
tried to
the
put a
abuse itself is bad.
my
Is
mother tried to put a cross up in my room, and he took it down and he said, "You're a Nazi." And yeah, he used to beat me daily.
hmm. Yeah, I'm sorry to
It's
hear that. So,
a bad thing back. I mean, it's because
um,
the thing was he was a firefighter. He used to see a lot of crazy stuff, and I think he was sadistic. He was a
mm,
psychopath, a schizophrenic also.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
and
that stuff's really tough to deal with.
it will drive somebody insane. If you see somebody's head on the side of the road decapitated, it'll change your life forever. I can talk about it, but until you see it, change
Y-
your life forever.
It sounds pretty bad.
Bad.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because I've always felt, and I kind of still think that the problem of suffering, the problem of pain, is one of the strongest, or at least most persuasive arguments against God. And so it's interesting to hear you. It's almost like that has become an argument. You've almost co-opted that as an argument for God. Well, not really an argument, but that's the thing that persuaded you to change your mind.
That's one of the most the central things of what I'm saying through this whole hour that I've been talking is pain and suffering.
Hmm.
Pain and suffering will change you. If you've never suffered, if you've never felt pain,
Yeah.
then there's you know.
So, what do you say to people now? People who are currently experiencing pain, currently suffering, currently blaming God, and are angry at God because of their own suffering.
You know what we got to do is put ourselves in their shoes. See why they say that. You know.
Well, would you have like any perspective to give that person who's suffering?
I can see a lot of people that feel like they're not accepted in the world. That's a lot of suffering right now. The biggest problem with the world right now is people feel like they're not accepted by the world. The problem is that the world is not who you should feel like you should be accepted by.
Hmm.
Right? Right?
So,
I would say that the suffering is temporal, no matter how horrible the suffering is. Even if you lived 100 years of immense suffering, in eternity, in the span of eternity, it's only like but a blip on the radar screen. I think it was Paul that said, "I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed." Um, and
yeah,
and it,
that's a
yeah,
response. That's a one response that I kind of also saw in the Bible. Just the idea of putting things into perspective from a Christian point of view. That we all go to heaven someday, and then we're like, man, compared to eternity, this wasn't really. I mean, there was a little blip on the radar, even though it doesn't seem like that at the time. So that's something that
yeah,
I've thought about. That might
yeah,
sound kind of trite, but the reason I started to contemplate this argument, this defense, was because I started watching this show called I Survived, but it was like a special edition of the show where it was people who had near-death experiences. And one of the things that they said was, or one of the ideas that they kind of conveyed, was that after they had their experience, their entire perspective of everything changed. Like they're not afraid of death anymore at all. They're not even really afraid of pain because they know that this is all just really temporary. So it's like it might sound trite, but there are
yeah.
people who actually have completely transformed their perspective of pain and suffering and death
That's
based
actually a
on
good.
this idea of there's something after this life, like putting their hope in something beyond this world where we're suffering. And that's exactly what the Bible talks about. That's what Jesus said, don't store your treasures on earth where everything is destroyed, but store it in heaven. And that's actually I think that's kind of an interesting response to this problem of pain.
Yeah, and I've also seen too that people that usually are like to disprove the existence of God appeal to suffering in the world, usually aren't appealing to their own but to other people's. And but yet, if you examine an individual like Neo, and I've had my own difficulties. I've had a couple surgeries and different ailments. I was sick for 7 years of my life with a thing that the doctors couldn't diagnose, and finally got over. But but if you actually ask people, and I have, that suffered, they still hold a faith in God and that there's purpose to it. Um, so sometimes when people are appealing to suffering for the non-existence of God, they're not appealing to their own. I've noticed quite a bit, and I
Yeah.
and I think that this reality, we are like children. It's if you take a child to the doctor and have them get a shot or shots for school or certain things, at the moment it seems like the end of the world and the worst sort of suffering that they can imagine in a way, and they cry and throw a fit. But when they're adult, they see things differently, and I think that's how it will be in the afterlife when we see from another lens or perspective, is kind of think you were
Hmm.
alluding to there.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's a good example with the vaccine, and just things that everybody knows that there are things we do that we don't really enjoy, but that later turn out to be good for us, which again sounds really trite, and when you're talking about real suffering in this world, like crazy, terrible suffering. But there are stories of people who have gone through the worst kinds of things and have come out as amazing people. And I don't think that's a cop out. Uh, I think the Bible does almost kind of convey the idea that suffering, um, well, at least the way I kind of interpret it, maybe I'm interpreting a little bit into the message of the Bible, but I kind of feel like it's possible there's suffering in this world specifically to draw us to non-material interests. Otherwise, like if there's no pain, then we're all just going to be really content and just uh, you know are are we going to have any depth without pain? I really don't know. So I kind of feel like pain can serve a function. Now, do I think it always serves a function? That's a really big question. I don't know if I have an answer to that right now. Um, but I think it's possible. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that sometimes pain, even the worst kind of pain, does serve a function and does draw people to God or to just the spiritual things, you know, that God wants us to be considering, which I consider a lot of the moral messages of Jesus to be spiritual messages. So that's what I'm referring to there. So, and I think Neo gives us kind of a perfect example of that. He's somebody who was militant atheist, and through the pain, through the suffering, he was brought to a place where he has peace now in his life. And just this perspective that, yeah, this world does suck sometimes. There is a lot of pain, but he has peace because he's got hope beyond this broken world. So I find his story to be pretty interesting in that respect because it it's an example of what I suspected the New Testament is trying to say.
Yeah, I know it kind of goes along with Romans chapter 8, what you're saying, that for creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. God has, maybe as you said, subjected creation to a certain futility in the material realm that would draw him to the immaterial, because everything here dies, it fades away, there's nothing to invest here ultimately. Um,
Yeah. Well, another thing I want to point out is there's this idea that God is supposed to be fixing things in this world all the time. But theologically, or in terms of Christian doctrine, or just, what does the New Testament say? I don't see anything about God's just gonna, fix everything in the world. If anything, the New Testament assures Christians that they will experience suffering. That this world, it can be pretty crappy sometimes, and it's you're going to go through really, really hard times.
I actually have something similar to add to that. Some people believe that there's going to be suffering after Revelations, like as if there's hell is still going to exist eternally, and people are still going to be tortured after there's a new earth and a new heaven.
Yeah, well, so much more to the point, you know. Christians are theologically they're under no obligation to explain away suffering because basically they're promised that there will be suffering in this world. The whole point is to set your mind not on this world we're currently experiencing, but to turn your attention beyond that to a place that the Bible says does not have all the same kind of pain and
That's the
decay.
question I want to ask all of you. Do you believe hell is eternal, like after Revelations happen?
Well, for me, I haven't really studied the doctrine of hell very well, so I wouldn't really be able to give you an informed response.
For me, Neo, I don't know. I've never seen the place. I think for the majority of my life, I believed it's eternal. But I think most Christians believe it the first day they believe. They hear it at church and they nod their head in agreement to just about everything the pastor might say without questioning it. Then having question and study, I do see scriptures that seem to point almost to a type of annihilation. So, which is my hope. I mean, I hope that and believe God can, have a finality to His justice that He ultimately hasn't created a place where sinners keep sinning and He has to keep laying on the hammer.
And
But
that's what I
He'll
want
have a conclusion. And there's verses, like I say, that give me inklings of that. But of course, there's other verses that seem to lean another way. And don't know, man.
That's what I'm saying. I think that God will not allow suffering after this suffering. There's no suffering after this. So, I mean, the suffering of hell, I mean, there's no way that God is going to allow the hell to go on forever. Here's the thing. People start to say, well, hell is eternal, or heaven is eternal, or this is eternal, or that is eternal, right? Well, God is the author of eternity. So, therefore, He could make hell not eternity again if He wants to. So, like, let's say what we know as eternity, like you will be burning in hell for eternity. I don't really see Bible verses that say that specifically. Hell is just like a temporary place for me. A lot of Molinists that I know talk about like hell hell, heaven and hell don't exist yet. I don't think that. I do think that heaven and hell exist now, but I think that time is irrelevant to God. So therefore, heaven and hell are a timeless, spaceless entity. See what I mean? Because to God, time is timeless and spaceless. So therefore, heaven and hell could be whatever time He wants it to be. He could put people there in the future or in the past.
Yeah, and these are, yeah, and you could think about this stuff like till the cows come home, but I think sometimes
If it's not biblical, I don't care.
you think about people like to think about everybody else's experience, but I don't think that's necessary,
saying that everybody's going to hell. Like, how do you know when hell exists? Does hell exist now, or does hell exist? To God, time is irrelevant. So hell could exist now or later. To Him, it doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
I wanted to. I think we've got a couple atheists. Cliff.
I'm not an atheist.
Okay. So Cliff wanted to.
Yes.
So Cliff wanted to. Well, Cliff asked a question in the side chat. Cliff, do you want to ask it here?
Right. So you talk about things like, for example,
My boy said we're living in hell.
Yeah. So when you say something like, well, we give our kids a vaccine so they undergo a small suffering so that they can benefit later or something. But I mean, fundamentally is to that you have to give them the vaccine. that there is no other way that you could make the same benefit happen. Like, if you could, you wouldn't give them the vaccine. Like, if there was an oral medication they could take without jabbing a needle into them, you'd give them the oral
You
medication.
see, it's much simpler than that. My boy just said it's much simpler than that. If you want a woman, but you can't look at her and lust, this is hell. You know? To him, he's like, I want that booty, but I can't have it. See what I mean?
Yeah, Cliff, the example used was not an exact example of life. I can name some suffering in my life that is, say, molding my character in a certain direction, that without it, I would not probably have the benefit.
But he is suffering
And
without that booty.
I guess it sounds like you're saying that, God could have done it. Yeah, he could have done it in any other way, I suppose. God is God. And for me personally, I'm not questioning, the.
Well, I think maybe what Cliff was saying is that it's not inherently necessary in the example of the vaccine for the pain to experience the pain in order to produce the good result. I think Cliff is trying to say that it's not inherently necessary to experience the pain. Like, if we could avoid the pain, we would avoid the pain. So what I'm kind of postulating, though, is that maybe the pain actually is necessary for certain outcomes, certain positive outcomes.
I think you could possibly make that argument in sort of an abstract sense in some case, but it's very easy to think on counterexamples. Like, you can think on examples where people are subjected to a horrible life, they die in agony, and no one knows about it. So they die an unbeliever, no one knows about it. So what was the purpose of that?
Well, I mean, you can't rule out, first of all, you can't rule out that there was a purpose. And, I mean, there's just a whole lot of questions that this raises. It's a huge can of worms, because then you have to say, well, could the purpose extend beyond that one individual? And then you get into questions about, like, how does God deal with choosing between the individual, what's good for the individual versus what's good for everybody, and does God go through those kinds of conundrums? I just think there's a whole lot of missing information there. I guess what I would say is that you can't preclude that there was a purpose. So the problem of pain definitely is not a disproof of God. Also, the assumption that the maximally good world is one without suffering, I used to think that was very intuitive, but I'm kind of doubting that a little bit, because I sometimes think that without suffering, we kind of just become complacent and kind of atrophy a little bit in certain ways. So
without
just
what?
A lot of
Without what did you say? I didn't hear that part. Without what we atrophy?
Without pain, I feel like without pain we become well, like in psychology. My wife's a therapist, so I have a degree in psychology too. So yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. So I used to have this big problem when parents would allow their children to cry in their cribs. And now I kind of understand that there can be a function to this, and it's to increase their distress tolerance. And if you don't do work to increase the distress tolerance, then that can affect their development. They can become dependent, like over-dependent. So I wonder sometimes if there's something very similar to us just in adulthood, where if we don't experience some kind of pain, and maybe at this point it's not even the most appropriate word, but something that increases our distress tolerance or draws us to bigger truths in some way, forces us not to rely on this world for everything that we want.
Well,
maybe
I think there's something to be said for that. any one emotion or state of being sustained for a long period of time is probably going to be boring, which is why eternity always kind of scared me. The idea of eternity in heaven, it's all going to be happy, there's no crying, there's no tears, there's no sadness. That seems like it would get very boring to me, because I think that, that's like kind of like the yin and yang thing, is like without, and there's a poem that I really like, but talks about like basically your capacity to feel joy comes from the fact that you felt sadness or sorrow on other times, so I think there's something to be said about if we don't ever experience pain or we don't experience loss, then we can't appreciate maybe some of the things that we have, but I think there's some truth to that. I don't know that I necessarily would agree that, the whole child thing, I don't necessarily think that we have to like teach kids when they're babies that they need to experience distress, but I understand what you're saying, is that we have to have a balance of, because that's why drugs aren't good, because your body has to find the homeostasis, so like the balance of, you can't be in this euphoria all the time, that doesn't work, so.
Could I jump in here real quick? Because I noticed, like, earlier it's almost like if God could do it a different way, he didn't have to have the suffering. But then, of course, people will point to the dualism as though they see the need for it. Well, maybe that's what this life is. Maybe it is so that we experience that dualism, and then in the next life, be liberated from the very thing that, I'm sure you don't enjoy sadness and sorrow and pain and those things.
No, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't know if any sustained, like, can you think of any time in your life where what I was trying to say is that, like, we haven't ever existed in like a perpetual state of one emotion, which is supposedly what it's going to be in heaven. But it's always, because there's no sadness, there's no whatever, so it will be eternal bliss in heaven. If that's okay, if everybody can exist there, why would God not just create everybody there in the first place?
Well, I don't know. I would have to study the doctrine of heaven before I agree that that's accurate from a biblical point of view. Because I think there are a lot of ideas that come more from tradition than from the source texts. But besides that, I think it's a good question. So like, if pain and suffering are ideal here on earth, then why is it not ideal in heaven? So I
wanted to say that Scott and B are just like Scott and B kind of hold like this, maybe they think they're atheist view, but when it comes down really down.
Wait a minute.
I'm saying though that you guys actually don't talk like most atheists do. I would say if there were a male and a female on Google Plus that don't insult people with beliefs, it is Scott and B.
Oh, I guess that's a good thing, maybe.
Yeah, and be nice to see you again, by the way. It's been a long time.
I know.
I don't get any benefit, or I try not to get any benefit of insulting anybody. There's some who I would say maybe test patience and make them easy targets for those insults. And it's pretty obvious.
I just see you, Scott, you and B are pretty much on the same level, I would agree, right?
I can only speak for myself. I can't speak for B at all.
Well, being a Christian, talking to both of you, you guys are very respectful in the same way.
Yeah.
Scott is very respectful. B is very respectful.
I actually think that a lot of the non-believers here, I think we've got the cream of the crop here tonight. Cliff's pretty awesome too. And then you ever talk to Joe Sunseed?
Joe's pretty funny.
Did you say cream of the crap?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's my accent.
Brother John is actually.
Yeah, that's how I describe
Brother John's
you guys as atheists.
Well, do you think that comes from, like, I could say the same thing as, like, well, you guys aren't like real normal Christians because you're kind of being nice to me and you're not telling me I'm going to hell.
No, I don't say atheists. I just say non-believers because I don't say the word atheist. if you want to label yourself as atheist, you can go ahead and do that.
I'm
not
just saying everybody here is really nice.
Everybody's free. I think it's all good. I don't really care about the label all that much, but it seems like it helps people know how to interact.
B, do you label yourself as an atheist?
I said, Cliff said I'm a lame theist.
Lame theist.
I said I was an agnostic atheist, meaning I'm not going to tell you that I can prove anything, but I do not believe that there is a God, especially not the God of the Bible, for sure.
That's cool. I'm not going to argue with you over that. I'm going to tell you why maybe I believe it, but you shouldn't. That's okay. But, me and Scott got to that same point. Scott, you're not really an atheist.
Why is that?
Because you don't think that God could not exist.
When have I said that?
You said that there's no way that
Your CD was skipping.
No, you said intelligence cannot come from nothing, right?
I don't recall ever saying that.
Oh, we talked about it one night. Maybe.
Maybe you have.
I think
you know.
I think
That's
Neo
maybe
is
privately.
using the words differently than you guys.
But I mean, obviously intelligence can't come from nothing, right?
Sure, and that's an avenue that I don't know anything about. I haven't studied it, but I will be the first to admit that I'm not going to be some of the people who are claimed to be automatic geniuses on a topic. If I don't know something, I am very, very quick to say, you know what, I don't know that. I will do my best to look into it and maybe get you an answer another time.
By the way, Brother John has the sickest yin-yang symbol I've ever seen so far.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Thank you. Getting a lot of compliments about that
saying.
lately.
That's what I'm saying. The yin yang thing, that makes so much more sense to me. The whole, I don't know if that's if you're into the maybe the kind of Buddhist idea.
Even as a Christian, I believe in this idea. I believe that there is a balance to things. Of course, God wants a balance to things, in my view.
Well, but then how does heaven work? How does heaven work? There's no balance to heaven. That's when everything's like if at the end after Revelation happens and it's all destroyed and Satan's whatever.
It's all going to be good.
It's all good. Everybody's good. There's nothing else.
Yeah, but B, it does make it sound like you can't have a good time now unless something bad happens. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I'm at the point in my life I like when things go good and there's no negative interaction with people or sicknesses or troubles with my car or whatever it is, and I don't need those things anymore.
Right.
To make me hope something better. But it almost seems like you would almost be in heaven, and after a while you're like, man, I wish something bad would happen.
Well, no, not that I wish it.
To make it good.
That I've never experienced a life. I've never experienced, and I'm pretty sure you haven't. Nobody here has experienced an existence that didn't have ups and downs and in between, right? Because, and that's what I was trying to say is like, I mean, maybe that's like a rationalization after the fact that we do that like, oh, now I can appreciate how happy I am now because I've been in a really bad place before, or we can look at other people that are in horrible places and realize how good we have it. That's like the light without the dark, you can't have left without the right. But how can you have just one extreme on one side that always continues on this extreme and doesn't change from that?
Well, people do it all the time.
Here's a good question.
In life, though, if they come from a refugee camp or some place where they had difficult, and they come to America or something, they're thrilled about it. It's
because they've experienced what it's like to be on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think the duality of this life is important myself.
I don't actually.
I know Scott wanted to. Sorry.
Well, yeah, just a real quick thing. I mean, let's say a time in your life, or maybe it's even now, that everything is going really, really well. Do you ever miss the downs?
I do. Sometimes I think about when I was like a middle school teenager, when it was like, but it was more of a romanticized, crappy angst teenage girl kind of thing. So I don't know if that's necessarily what you're talking about.
Sure. And everyone's kind of laughing at me, and here's the reason I say that. Because sometimes I do miss the downs, just to maybe think. It's like, gosh, if I would have done differently, would I be better off earlier? Would I be better off later? it's kind of that challenge that I think we all have. Maybe that's way off topic. It just what you were
I
saying.
understand what you're saying. Like, I sometimes think about like the people that are like creative. Like, I think of like creative geniuses, people like Van Gogh, or some of the people that are like have created some of the works of art that we think are amazing. Like, they had really shitty lives for the most part. They created something beautiful out of this horrible situation that they were in. So I think there is beauty that comes out of pain a lot of the times. Maybe not for that person, but for what we experience later.
We're all in a horrible situation. I mean, right now, everybody on the planet is in a horrible situation.
I don't think I'm in a horrible situation.
I'm in a great situation.
Oh, you're in a great situation. You don't work for.
I'm not in a horrible situation.
You're not a slave to You're not a slave to the company that you work for.
Well,
I enjoy the company I work for.
The fact that I have food and I'm not worried about people killing me makes me probably better off than a lot of people, most of the people in the world.
I am the company I work for.
There you go. Even better.
Security. What if one day that security ends?
Just the fact that that all of us are talking here means that we're probably better off than like 80% of the population of the world at this point.
Just the point of me even paying $35 a month for internet service. You know how much $35 costs them? $35 costs them as much as it takes to make a meal for 50 people a month.
Right.
If you're going to make some kind of sweeping general statement, like everyone out there is in a horrible position, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then that's not going to really take into account any kind of gradient at all. There is no scale, right? Like someone in sub-Saharan Africa who is eating burgers that are made out of fly patties, right? And me that I can go and leisurely, lay out by the pool or something. Like we're both according to what you said, we're both in horrible situations. So explain to me why those two situations are indistinguishable to you in terms of horribleness.
Because we're all going to hell. I don't know. Tom, I recognize your bunny avatar now.
I mean, everybody.
It's very fluffy.
I wanted to just say I have to study this more, but I don't just automatically accept the premise that heaven's just the same thing all the time.
Crazy topics. Everybody.
I'll have to study that doctrine more.
Lame theists, they bring up stuff like that.
This conversation has run like a semi with 27 gears in it.
That's really, I mean, you just actually made a claim, and I just asked you, like, what that meant is all, really. It's pretty much just one gear.
First we started with...
We're not even out of park yet, actually.
Okay, well, what I was saying is, before everybody came in, me, Brandon, and Truth Speller were talking about my testimony. Then Cliff and Positively Godless and B showed up. And then Brother John showed up, and we were all talking about, like, just regular...
I apologize for coming into a public hangout.
But I'm just saying, and then it got all this, like, oh, well, people are talking about this, and people are talking about that. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Jesus writing never-ending story.
I came in, you were talking about hell.
Falco.
Are you mad that it's not about you?
No, I'm saying I don't care about me.
So are you gonna? I don't even know what you're talking about now. But are you retracting your statement that everyone is in a horrible position?
The question that you had asked, because there's no question attached to what you had even asked. I mean, we're talking about 5 different things. What question are you asking again?
You're saying I didn't ask a question? Okay, I'll ask it again.
Okay.
Do you remember the scenario I had of me like laying by the pool with a mimosa and somebody making a patty out of flies and eating
No,
them?
I was not here for that. Yeah.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. Well, can you imagine those two situations? Are you here for this now?
You're gonna have a fly patty made out of. I mean, come on, you've got to.
I'm just trying to confirm you're actually
As
listening.
if it could exist in real life, right? Fly patty made.
Actually,
No,
it
Neo,
does.
you said that everybody has is in a horrible place now.
So if I can provide you with a video right now of people in sub-Saharan Africa making patties.
Okay. Let me explain to you this right now. The best people on the planet, the richest people on the planet, have the worst problems.
Okay, well, let's address these things one at a time, right? Because
Okay.
first of all, you're telling me that I'm.
Listen, Bill
First
Gates.
of all,
Bill Gates. Okay. Listen. You don't think Bill Gates has his problems?
I would rather
okay,
have Bill Gates' problems than starving children in Africa's problems.
either you're moving the goalposts, or you're obfuscating, or you're deflecting.
That's
But like,
the point that I
first
was
of all,
making.
you said you couldn't even you weren't here for what I
You're not
said.
listening to the original point, man. You're not listening.
Well, I'm trying to do that. I really
The
am.
original
What are we
point.
talking about again?
I'm not
More
moving
money,
the goalposts. I said.
Wait, Neo, is what you were saying? More money, more problems? Is that what you
No,
were saying?
I said everybody has problems on the planet.
That's not what you said. You in fact said that everybody is in a horrible situation.
I think we might be talking about problems in two different ways.
Well, I just asked him to
there's
clarify. That's all.
Well, there's obviously the problem of like
See, you just
material
stepped into
suffering.
the conversation and you started taking my words out of context. That's what you did.
So
actually, I didn't do
there's
that at all.
obviously the problem of like
specifically asked
material
you to
suffering.
clarify.
You're just
One at a
you
time.
wanna take
Okay,
words out
too
of
many
context.
people talking at once.
Listen, now you're talking smack. You just want to take words out of context. Goodbye, little boy.
Okay,
Goodbye,
so
little
there's
boy.
obviously the problem of material
Neo,
suffering. But
he does this all the time, Neo.
Okay.
The rage quit.
I kind of interpreted what Neo was saying as more of a problem of character or personal development or spiritual development, if you want to take the Christian.
So asking him to clarify the statement he made was rage quit inducing.
Yeah, he's so sensitive.
Yeah.
I think like it mightn't be.
How did you say he's sensitive?
It mightn't be intended that way, but when you make statements to equalize suffering, like anyone who's actually lived a life full of heavy suffering would get massively offended.
Yeah.
Like I lived in India for 2 years. There's a massive segment of that population that lives and dies in extreme poverty, constantly fighting hunger and sickness and illness. I mean, I saw families living in garbage dumps that having to salvage, living in an actual dump, like out of materials made in a dump, that have no access to food.
Okay, well,
have no
everybody's
access.
taking my words out of context. Anything I said is out of context.
Welcome back, though.
And then to say to you, well, that person living in that dump is in the same situation because you're a slave because you have to go into work on Monday.
You want to take my words out of
Right,
context?
give us the context, Neo, because what I heard was that everybody's in a horrible situation.
I'm not going to talk. I'm just going to let him clarify his position.
Hey, goodbye, Tom. Goodbye.
Ooh.
Okay. I just think we're using the same word with different definitions or different meanings.
And then he left again.
Okay.
What a bitch.
Like I think it sounded to me like he's talking more about not so much the suffering, but more the
I get
spiritual.
what he could be saying. Yeah, that like spiritually, maybe from a Christian perspective, everybody's in the same position. Maybe that's what he was saying. That like, okay, Bill Gates, if he's not Christian, and the starving African child is they're both going to hell, so they're both in a horrible situation. But that doesn't really speak to physically right now what people experience.
Yeah, but I think that's actually the example that made me think he's speaking like spiritually in a bad spot because
Then he was talking about Bill Gates, though. I mean,
there's passages in the scriptures that say it's more difficult for a rich person to
Eye of a camel.
enter
Or the eye of a
heaven.
needle,
Right,
yeah.
right, exactly. But I think you can. It's not just about getting into heaven. I think there's a component of like character development there.
Right. He couldn't be referring to like Bill Gates' difficulty. Bill Gates' difficulty getting into heaven, because what he's referencing is this life's horribleness, right? I mean, he can't make any like in heaven. Everybody is not in a horrible position, so that can't be what he was talking about.
Well, the fact that like because it could also like come back to like maybe the Mother Teresa thing that like there's some value in suffering because it helps us rely on God. So like Bill Gates, it would be, this is what Brandon was saying, like that verse kind of speaks to the idea that it's harder for a rich person, somebody who has the comforts of this world, to accept God because they don't have, so like there could be some value in suffering because it teaches people to rely on God, which I think is kind of a screwed up idea in itself, but that could be maybe what he was talking about.
I think he could have solved the entire problem if he just made a sentence or two to qualify it, and then saying that he didn't necessarily mean horrible in that way. But I think he doubled down, and then he called my mosquito, my fly patty burger video some kind of lie, which, by the way, I posted in the side chat, and you can see them making patties out of flies. The title actually says mosquitoes, but they're not mosquitoes, they're flies.
They're like burger patties? Ooh.
Yeah, they catch all the flies, right? And like big nets and pots and stuff like that, and then they like mash them up and they cook them kind of like we do hamburgers, and then they eat them. It's lots of protein.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Insects have a lot of protein. Like spiders and stuff, they have more protein than like a lot of other meat.
Yeah, I think the statistic was like 3 or 4 times more protein than a hamburger.
If we originated from monkeys, what's the problem? That's what animals do.
True. I mean, the only reason that I don't like eating crickets or ants is because I didn't grow up eating crickets or ants, probably. I mean, I don't really think there's anything wrong with it. But.
Yeah, in other cultures they eat, I'm not saying that it doesn't sound bad or make me gag if I try to do it, but in other cultures they eat a lot of different things, and bugs are a common protein supplement, and to them they don't see it. It's all about perspective and how you view things.
Well, it's like here we eat pigs. I mean, or like if we're talking about different things that we think of as pets that they eat in other cultures, So I don't know that necessarily makes any difference to me.
I mean, the purpose of the example is that obviously us being Western, most of us probably, then we can identify with that example, right? We don't even have to go that far. We can just go to something that's more objective, like Cliff was saying, just people literally living in like shit and refuse, right? If you want to do that, we can, but the example is pretty effective for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I personally think that's the strongest argument against at least certain kinds of theism. I don't think it's an argument against theism generally, but like certain religions, somewhat Christianity, but any religion where they say that God is good, that's a pretty tough argument. But I do think there are some responses. I'm not sure if any of them I feel are complete, but I think there's some interesting things to consider. Like
so what is your stance, Brandon? Because I have not talked to you before, so I don't know where you stand on everything. It says you're a theist, so I'm assuming you're a Christian. Yes, no?
Yeah. Okay. And I don't claim to know everything for sure. Like some of my conclusions I don't claim absolute certainty about.
That's good.
There are a number of my beliefs that I hold provisionally. Well, I guess all of them are, but I think some of them are more provisional than others.
How long have you been a theist then? Or a Christian or whatever?
Well, I was raised that way, and then I went through a period towards the end of high school where I really doubted everything, kind of gave things up for a little bit. And
how old are you? You don't look very old, so.
Oh, that's because I'm using an old profile picture.
Okay. So you're like your 20s, 30s?
I'm 32.
Okay. In the picture, you look fabulous, though. So
I know, that's why I used that picture.
All right.
Well,
it's from AOL.
Yeah, that's my AOL.
Yeah.
That's too far along. You got to go like CompuServe or like.
Is that the one you use on the dating sites?
Yeah, on the dating
Prodigy chat room.
Yeah.
He said he's married, so he doesn't have to do OkCupid. So.
My wife actually
I'm
took
34.
this picture in college.
I'm 34, so I went through the same. I grew up Christian as well, so I went through the same process of.
Yeah.
Grew up, believing it, and then I had to go through a period of where I kind of felt like I maybe came out on the other end of it.
What percentage of your wardrobe is pink?
My siblings went through that.
Actually, that was what I was talking to Neo before. Like, pink is not even my favorite color. Purple is, but
Yes.
See,
so
Neo, I know you're listening, but you left, so you're not going to be able to like talk about this subject. So
Looks more
No.
purple to me than pink.
well, and actually the camera makes it look more saturated than it is because there's like yellow and orange in it too. And I'm gonna go on Saturday and get it redone and get more purple in it. So, but I do like to match a little bit. So, you know.
Well,
I'm sorry, I didn't
B.
mean to
Should I call
I
you B?
interrupted. So.
Do I call you B? Is that what I call you?
I don't know. You can. My name is Kylie. My real name is Kylie, but most people call
Oh,
me B
Kylie.
even if they know my real name. So.
Kylie. Okay. My siblings are probably more like you. They came out on the other side.
Hmm.
They went to the dark side.
The dark side. Oh, Kylo Ren. I like it.
No, but
The metrosexual side?
no, but the things that convinced me probably doesn't sound very convincing now, but it was one of the categories of things that convinced me was some personal experiences. But then what really kind of solidified some of those pretty provisional beliefs was more the that was back when intelligent design was gaining some steam, and that's kind of what led me to believe that God exists.
Oh God, what happened?
And then I kind of came around to looking at some of the other biblical things again, and I'm a lot different than I was as a high schooler, but I'm still a theist and non-traditional Christian.
Interesting. Is your personal revelation type experience, would you say that's one of the main deciding factors in kind of making your decision? And that
You mean
seems to
like
be
the personal experience kind of thing?
Yeah, it seems to always be the case, right? If I mean,
Oh,
it's really
well,
the case.
for me, I don't think so in my case because I haven't had too many personal experiences, but I've had I've been in close contact with those kinds of situations, though.
Okay.
But that's not really the primary thing that leads me to be a theist, though.
Yeah. I think that's good in a way because, in my opinion, right? I mean, I'm probably gonna sound like DPR, but like, you talk to enough people and you talk about enough arguments and like, oh, what about this and what about this? And then usually it always comes down to, well, you know what? I had a personal experience with God, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the last resort where it's basically unfalsifiable, right? They're basically saying, well,
Yeah.
like here, you know what? I'm gonna just fucking nuke this shit right now, and you're not gonna be able to say anything because you don't even know what my personal experience was.
Right. Nobody can argue against my experience.
Right. And the situation is commonly, well, I it's too personal, I can't go into it, or you wouldn't understand it. So it's also falsifiable because we basically have no data about it. The person won't divulge it. So I think not relying on that, I think it's kind of, not really very convincing.
Yeah,
Well,
I
the fact
definitely don't rely on it, but I do think that there is some value in personal experience. Not all the time, but I think sometimes there can be because I think there are experiences that could, in theory, be corroborated independently. And if that happens, well, then I think even though you can't really say it's scientific, I think you can say it's objective.
Well, it depends on how much value you put on something being able to be empirically, statistically, scientifically verified. Like if it's okay with you to rely on more of a personal testimony thing, an anecdotal kind of account of something, then maybe you don't need like the statistical evidence for. So it just depends on the topic. It depends on what you're talking about. Like if I talk to my friend and they say, oh, yesterday I went to and watched this and this movie and I ate this and this for dinner, I probably don't need like statistical evidence or scientific evidence that they did that. But if they're telling me that they, I'm borrowing from other people's arguments, but if they're telling me that they flew off the Empire State Building or they rose from the dead, those are things that I need some more evidence for. So
Right.
it just
Yeah.
depends on the topic that you're talking about.
Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're talking about is more of a scientific approach, and I favor a scientific approach, but I think there are cases, at least in principle, there could be situations where an individual can acquire objective knowledge without it being completely scientific, because you can't duplicate it, you can't.
Well, what is it? I guess you have to define what objective means, right?
Well, yeah, that's a good point. So I would say it can be verified or at least corroborated outside of that one individual.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Hey, good night, Scott.
It
See you
can be
later.
established outside of that one individual. So
Okay.
I guess here's a just off the top of my head an example. So let's say you have this really weird dream one night and God is speaking to you and he's saying, hey, listen, there's a huge worldwide flood that's coming and here's all the instructions to build this boat. I'm just kind of using a ridiculous example here. So then you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, that is the craziest thing. And then
I've heard this
you
story
talk-
somewhere before. Where was it?
Yeah.
This sounds familiar.
So then you wake up and then somebody rushes over to you and they say, I just had the craziest dream. God was telling me to tell you there's a huge flood coming and you have to build this boat. Like, that is a corroboration, at least, that there was some kind of a transfer of information that occurred there.
Maybe.
So I think in principle but it wouldn't be scientific because you can't repeat it, you can't measure it statistically. So I think it's possible to have some level of objective knowledge even when it's not scientific, and so it's reasonable sometimes to incorporate those things into your worldview.
It wouldn't actually be evidence of a transfer of knowledge, though, because, I mean, it's a dream and people have dreams all the time. You'd have to somehow make the correlation that that source material came from some kind of outside consciousness.
Yeah, external to the system.
Well, the system would be you, right?
Well, you and the other person.
Claimed other person.
What?
It's an assertion, right? You'd have to prove that. I don't see how you would be able to.
Prove which thing?
Well, if you have a dream,
Mm-hmm.
and God tells you something, and you're saying that's proof of a trading of information, I don't see how you would prove that.
All I'm saying is that...
I don't see how you... I'm sorry.
All I'm saying is that it's corroborated. There are independent sources for this information.
How do you know that?
Well, because without you conveying any information, this other independent person explained with high specificity, the same experience that you had.
Okay, so he's telling you something that corroborates with reality somehow, or
that corroborates with your experience. His experience corroborates your experience.
Can you give me an example?
I thought we were discussing the example.
Noah's Ark.
So,
yeah, he can be very specific in the example. Like, he could have a dream where it says you have to build a boat to exactly these dimensions, you have this much time, this is the flood. He's 100%, he maps out the blueprints in your head. And another guy comes over and he shows you the drawing and say, look at this, what happened I dreamed about. And you're like, holy crap, it's the exact same dimensions, the exact same boat. And you go, did he say, you got 3 years? He said, yeah, exactly 3 years. That's the kind of event.
Okay.
Or, here's another way you could do it. You both wake up and say, I had this crazy dream. Okay, I'm going to write down my dream. You write down your dream, and then we're going to compare. So now you know you're not playing off of each other's stories here. And then you compare notes, and it's exactly the same. You're like, 1, 2, 3, you switch papers, and it's exactly the same. there's a correlation there that is very difficult to explain without some kind of influence external to the system of you and this other person. So I think in principle, you can have personal experience that is corroborated.
But that doesn't mean that it's true, like so I can tell you that it's more true than what you believe.
I think you have more positive reason to believe that than if you just had that dream all by yourself.
Right. Well, yeah, but like maybe, but there's also, you have to know, like, psychology-wise, you said your wife is a therapist or counselor or something. Like, there's a whole idea of like a mob mentality, like where people can like have like group.
Yeah.
No, it's like, you know, like where people can kind of experience the same kind of hallucinations, and then because they talk about it afterwards, they kind of change
just
their
like
stories to
the
fit.
point.
So,
Just like
so
you
you could
listed,
have three
like-
people. You could have three people that totally agree on exactly what happened, but because they were there and they kind of talk to each other, they agree on it. That's not necessarily what they all thought initially.
Right.
So,
Yes. And
so
I've heard that
could be what's
before.
going on.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and my response is that these are not independent witnesses. So you do have to establish that the witnesses are independent, or that at least the sources are independent.
Well, yeah. I mean, are we talking about like, you know, detailed timelines of events that happen geologically or astronomically, or with people, or, you know, predicting this and that, or are we just talking about like G-Man's answered prayer, right? I mean, there's a different level, right? And so you'd have to meet something that's going to be pretty predictable.
Isn't that why the scientific method, to me, that's why the scientific method is not foolproof, but it's a pretty good way to ferret out these things that are kind of anomalies, right? You know, like you can have groups or clusters of people that all say the same thing, but when you statistically, you know, go out and do the studies and have the research repeated and whatever, those kind of things are going to kind of work themselves out. So that's why the scientific method, to me, makes more sense to use than these very like, oh my gosh, things all line up, and how could you deny this kind of thing? That's why it makes more sense to me than to use kind of what you're saying, Brandon.
Okay, hold on a second. Neo Cloud is here. He's back, and he's saying
I want to
time over
respond
there
to.
too. Okay, can I say something after you're done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me just respond to B, because I think she makes a really good point. Because essentially what I'm hearing is if the effect was real, then it should be statistically significant.
Yeah.
That kind of. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Like it should be.
So,
it should bear itself out in repeated testing, which is kind of what the scientific method shows. You know.
Right. But my problem with that is we're not talking about reliable physical laws. We're talking about ostensibly some kind of a mind at work here, which is much harder to measure statistically, especially if we're referring to something that is not studied as well empirically, like an alien mind, which
but the human mind can be studied empirically if you do it in certain ways.
Yeah, but I guess specifically my point is we don't know when God is going to do what or for what reasons. So it's very hard to trace. So I think when you have a situation where an experience is independently corroborated, the fact that it might not show up statistically does not. These things are both true.
Well, that to me is like saying that, like, so when you go to take a medicine, like if you're sick and you go to the doctor, do you want the one that has been proven through research, through the scientific method to actually work on people, or do you want the one that the doctor's like, dude, me and my 3 friends totally used this and it worked? Like, which one do you want to use to cure you or your wife or whatever of your illness? You want to use the one that probably has been borne out in multiple studies to actually work, not just the one that this guy and his 3 friends and whoever was there told you worked.
I'm not using this as an argument to say that people would be better off praying than going to the doctor.
Well, but what I'm saying is that we don't use the same rationalization in anything else except for in religion. Like, you're trying to use a different argument to believe what you're saying about God than you are about the things that you do in normal life, is what I'm trying to point out.
No, I don't think so. You can have real anomalies that remain anomalies and they don't register statistically, but it's a real thing though. It's still a real occurrence.
A real meaning what? Real to the, yeah, that's a little bit different. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, if I could jump in. To me, I have a view that if you could, say, prove God with the scientific method, then you would disprove the God of the Bible. There's a scripture that says, "Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God." This would include scientific and philosophical knowledge in my mind.
Sure.
When Jesus
Yeah.
spoke of the kingdom of heaven, he said that the kingdom of heaven doesn't come by observation. You can't say to someone, "Lo, it's here," or "Lo, it's over there," or "Behold, it's within you." It is a very subjective thing, and that's the beauty of God. You don't have to be a brilliant scientist to find God. You don't have to cross the sea and go to a cave and trip out on hallucinogens on 8 hours on a fast to find God. You can simply call out to Him.
Well, I think you have to be careful because I don't think the Bible there is precluding science, because there are other passages where it says that evidence for God is all throughout nature.
Well,
Yeah,
and
sure.
that's the thing. This to me feels a very slippery kind of argument to have, because again, like what I was saying to Brandon, is when you are sick, or truth speller, I don't know if you have kids or
Yeah, I do.
or whatever. I have 4 kids. My oldest daughter is type 1 diabetic, and I do not, even when I was still a Christian, I did not rely on praying or God to heal her. I used insulin, which was proved through the scientific method.
Yeah.
So there's
But
certain things that we allow ourselves to use this kind of rationalization for, but then we use this God rationalization for things that we kind of already in our head know that are not going to kill our children. Is kind of what I'm trying to point out.
Brandon, let me clarify too, because I got your point and it's perfect. I wanted to make clear that knowing God and evidence for God are different. That actually, Jesus said, He has come and given us an understanding to know Him who is true, and that is somewhat subjective, I believe, in my own experience. I like to argue objective things and show evidence and argument those things that we talk about in these chats. But ultimately, I believe coming to God or knowing God is a gift of God. But it also comes if you call out. Jesus said, "If you being evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will He give the Holy Spirit to those who ask Him?"
Right. Yeah.
The Holy Spirit is the gift of faith. It's the gift of discernment, knowing God through His Spirit. It is subjective, I think, to a degree. I mean,
Well, that
Yeah.
I can respect that. I can respect somebody who says, you know what, bottom line, and I've talked to, you guys were talking about Matt Slick before. I've talked to him before, and he basically said, when it all came back to it, like there's all these intellectual arguments for things, but when it came back to it, the reason that he believed, and he could maybe I'm misquoting him. I don't want to say like this is absolutely what he said, but I felt like what he was saying is that the reason he believed was because of an experience he had, a spiritual experience that he had, and that's my experience, how I grew up. That is why people believe, because of a personal, subjective experience that they had, and that's okay if that's what somebody can acknowledge, that that's why they believe something. But to say that that is provable via science or the scientific method, or that I should believe that talking to you guys because of what you said you experienced, that's a little bit different.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that yes, that's a good point that you raise. It doesn't really help another person believe who didn't have that experience. I definitely agree with that. But what I'm saying is that in principle, those experiences, it is possible they could be objective if they are corroborated by something else.
That's
Some
true. I mean,
independent thing.
my
Yeah,
main
it is.
objection,
And
though,
so and so therefore it can contribute to a rational view. My point here is not to say anything. It's not to say that this should dictate human behavior at all. I'm not saying anything about what this means, how this means we should act, or what we should do about vaccinating our children or whatever. Well, the point is, can it be a rational position to base your views on an experience? I think there are certain cases where you can say that, yeah, it can be.
Well, I guess that depends on what what you're claiming. I mean, bottom line for me is that I don't. People could take whatever position they want. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. But when they start to take it outside of just what position they personally are taking, and they try to tell other people that they are wrong for what they're taking or what they're doing, that's where I have a problem. So,
Well,
if you want to say I believe this because I experienced this, cool,
Mhm.
that's fine. But if you want to tell me that I can't live my life the way that I want to live because you experienced something, that's where there's a problem.
And I would
Yeah,
say that
and
that would work on the other way around too, right? I mean, an atheist has their own subjective experience
Hmm.
that there's no God, and
Right.
they appeal to those things. And I wouldn't say that they're lying. I believe you
Right.
either believe something or you don't. You've
Right.
either experienced something or you haven't.
yeah,
So
and
I
a
mean,
lot of times
okay, sorry, go ahead, Brian.
it comes down to what is the evidence. And so
Right.
somebody says I had an experience, it was corroborated in this way. Isn't that awesome?
Hey,
Well,
Brandon,
then
as I
for that other person, it's not evidence for that other person because
and,
for
and
them it wasn't a corroborated experience for them.
I would
Even
even
though for
take
you
it.
it
I was
was.
going to say, hey, Brandon, as I was saying earlier before everybody got here, I used to be a hardcore militant atheist, but nobody wants to believe that. I told you that.
Mhm.
I don't.
I'd also take issue with.
Oh.
Okay. That wasn't me. I didn't even talk to him that time. So I'd also take issue with like the statement that atheists have a subjective experience that God doesn't exist, right? Because that's not necessarily the case. I mean,
Do you have all knowledge?
well, let me clarify it. I mean, if I were to phrase that and be charitable and like how I think you want to say it, I would say that atheists have a subjective experience, um, maybe that they don't have a subjective experience of God. That's what I would say. I wouldn't say that they have a subjective experience that there is no God, because I might not even ever think about that, right? I mean, and I might be open to the prospect also. I just haven't had the experience that there is a God.
Well,
Yeah, I get
an
the
experience
distinction.
is the experience, right? If you don't experience God in your life, that is the experience, right?
If how can I experience a an absence of experience?
Well, I'm just saying, you said you didn't experience God, right?
No,
Isn't that
that is correct. I have not.
okay? Well, that's your experience then.
Right. That's. We'll
Yeah, but
agree with
my
that.
experience is my experience. It's not an experience of
But are you all
not.
knowing? Do you have all knowledge? Then, if you're not, then your experience is subjective, just like all of ours is to some degree.
So yeah, okay.
Okay.
I think
I
that's
don't know
pretty.
I don't know where that gets us. It's kind of a trivial thing. Every
Well,
single one of us is in that
I
position.
kind of want to hear what.
Right.
Oh, sorry. Cliff had something to say in the side chat. I'd be interested.
I liked his experience, the absence of Justin Bieber. I think that's pretty good.
You live in Canada, right, Cliff?
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's your fault if you're in Canada.
Not my fault. I don't have anything to do with the dude. I don't think it's necessarily true that our experiences wouldn't count as evidences for other people. Like, for example, if B was telling me about her experience of living in a house that had a wood stove in it, and I never lived in a house with a wood stove in it, I don't see why I wouldn't be able to learn about what it's like to live in a house with a wood stove in it. The issue comes when you start talking about experiences where you have to weigh them against something else happened. Like if somebody started making a claim that you felt was obviously racist, well then you're going to weigh the claims that they are making against that race, against the fact that it's actually a rational claim. So, like, I think it is evidence, but the problem is how strong evidence is it when someone makes a claim like that? Like, if I was just to tell all of you right now, like, I just got back from being kidnapped by aliens, it's probably not going to convince all of you, like, right away that aliens exist.
Right. That's what I was
Because,
saying. Is like
yeah, right. It's probably
claiming
more
claiming
likely
that I
that,
had
like,
dinner and I ate this for dinner is one thing, but claiming I flew off the Empire State Building is another thing that you need a different set of evidence to believe. Yeah.
Right. But just imagine that if it became like a daily occurrence, that people were getting kidnapped by aliens all the time, and they came back with like snapshot photos of the aliens and like souvenir probes and all that kind of stuff. Then if someone said to you, man, rough night, at it again, I got the grays this time, you know what they're like with the
Oh,
probes.
God, dude. Why can't I get the reptilians?
Right? It would become an everyday occurrence, right? Because, so I think we just have to look at that. Like the reason why so many people become skeptical of a certain type of experience is how infrequently that's actually experienced, and you're weighing it against the fact it's something else.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't really like to look at it that way because it's a question of degree, and then it's very difficult to delineate. I prefer to ask whether it's independently corroborated in some way.
Well, even if it's independently corroborated, it'd be to a degree. You're never going to escape that.
But it's a quantized degree. Like you can say,
A quantized?
yeah, there's a number. It's not analog. Like you can say you can come to a point where you say I either have independent corroboration or I do not have it.
Yeah, it would
And
still
then
be a
after-
degree. You can have more independent corroboration or less independent corroboration.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
it's still
it's-
going to be
it's-
to a degree.
But it's discontinuous though. So you can have a hard line there where you can delineate. So that's why I prefer to look at it that way.
I think the alternate hypothesis would still stand. So let's say that you and B came to me tomorrow, and you both described like the very same sort of boat dream. And you had not talked to each other. You weren't even aware of it. You started talking to me, and I was like, this is pretty wild, Brandon. Like 15 minutes ago, B was telling me about this exact same boat thing going on. I would still have an alternate hypothesis. The alternate hypothesis could be that we know sort of how dreams are sort of created from stimulus in our environment. We have a bunch of ideas. We don't know 100% what they're actually for, but we have some ideas. So I could propose, for example, that something happened to both of you. You had a similar sort of stimulus, which made you had a similar sort of dream, and then when you tell the dream back, you're also basically, you're not getting it 100%, you're recalling it. So I can weigh this alternate hypothesis against the hypothesis that there's some kind of supernatural influence. Now, the more of you that start recalling this dream, the more unlikely the sort of environmental hypothesis starts to be, because now all of a sudden I had to sort of explain that everyone had a sort of similar impact, which sort of made that. So the more of you that would corroborate this in the greater detail, the more I would start leaning towards, I think there's something else going on that. So that's the way I would sort of look at it.
Yeah, well, that's true too. The specificity of the claim plays a role, and that's harder to delineate in a discontinuous way. That kind of is a question of degree. I'll have to think about how to resolve that because I don't like questions of degree.
Yeah, it's kind of inescapable, though.
I don't know. Maybe not.
I think for me it came back to like a default belief. Because of the way that I was raised, I like by default believed in God, and I had to go through all these steps to make me think about maybe this is not true. So if you can come from, I mean, Brandon, you said that you were kind of raised with the idea of God, so maybe we have a similar kind of background. So maybe you already kind of assume that this is true. So some of these things have to be very sure in the other direction to make you shift what you're saying. But like some people that have not been raised with the idea of the God or the God the same way that you think of it, it's a little bit different for them to look at the evidence, you know. So when I tried to look at evidence and tried to be objective, you know, as much as possible, because nobody is totally objective, as much as possible, I had to like acknowledge to myself that like maybe I was looking at this kind of from a biased or skewed kind of way that I was looking at it. So
Cliff says he's totally objective.
well, yeah, of course.
I believe it.
Apparently, Cliff is
he's Canadian.
Canadian.
Cliff, that's just awful. Come on, this is a Christian room, man. Come on. Can I bring it back real quick just to Matt Slick, because I think I was talking about him and then we start and I just want to clarify because
Tom,
go ahead.
Can I just like really quick respond to what P just said?
Of course.
My brother has raised the same point, and my response is I have competing motives though, and one of those motives is I don't want to look stupid.
Mm.
And that's become a more and more powerful motive the older I've gotten. And so,
You don't want to look stupid. What do you mean? What does that mean?
well, like, I don't want to look like an idiot if I say, like, oh, God spoke to me in a dream last night, and, that's it. That's all that happened, and I say that that's proof of God.
Why would you even have
So,
that fear though if you like believe it to be true and absolutely true, right?
Well,
Like I wouldn't feel stupid telling someone like, "Hey, 2 + 2 is 4," right?
well, I guess I guess what I mean is I want to feel that I have rational support for what I believe.
right. No, I can definitely identify with, like, I mean, maybe growing up Christian, I had this idea that, you're kind of given this verse that you're always supposed to have an answer for everything. So I felt like if I don't know the answer to somebody that asked me a question, that makes me feel very insecure. It did make me feel very insecure. So when I started this kind of journey towards atheism, it was not a comfortable place to be, to tell people I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know why we're here. I don't know how we all were created. To be in a place, because of the way that I grew up, to be in a place where I don't know the answers to everything still is not comfortable to me. But because of the way that I grew up, which was like there's black and white answers to every single scenario that you could be given.
Yeah,
So
which I actually find I don't like that about Christian culture, actually.
Mm.
I have a real problem with that. Well, I have a real problem with a lot of things in Christian culture, and that's definitely one of them, because I don't think Christians are called to have the answer to every single question. I don't think there's. I had a professor in college, and he said the gospel was not intended only for the super intellect.
yeah.
And I think that helps me to start questioning a lot of things in Christian culture, like what you just described.
Yeah,
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
that's. I was just gonna say, yeah, it's a good point. I mean, that's why I believe God gives the faith, and it's not necessarily understanding. People come with very limited understanding, and then they grow in the grace and knowledge of these things that are written in the Bible. Try to give an answer for the hope that's within them. That's why I said that about it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached, because it's the particular message, not some scientific philosophical answer. Jesus said, "Give the gospel. If they don't receive it, dust your feet and move on." He didn't say, give every answer to every philosophical or theological question they have. The message preached that Paul said, "I didn't come with the eloquence of wisdom or of human speech, lest the cross of Christ be made of no effect." It's a particular message, and it has to do with Christ dying for sins and being raised on the third day for justification, a free gift to anyone who believes, not of works, lest we boast.
Yeah.
So, Tom, I kind of cut you off a little bit because I wanted to respond to B. But did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, I wanted to say about Matt Slick because I think that's kind of maybe what started a lot of this, and I was saying that like I don't like or I was talking about how I don't like when Christians use the personal experience card as some sort of get out of jail free or some kind of trump card at the end, right? And I think it's kind of like deceptive actually. If that is if they're like unwilling to like tell me about the story, right? If they're gonna say something like, but it's really I can't. It's nothing I can even explain, right? I can't talk about it, right? It's too personal. It's like whatever reason they have for not divulging that. I think is what I would object to. And someone like Matt Slick, who is essentially a professional apologist, right? For him to go through all his different arguments, tag, intelligent design, blah blah blah, presuppositionalist, nothing can exist without my God, and then like hours and hours later, he says, well, it all comes down to a personal experience I had, right? Well, I mean, frankly, that's BS because are you saying that the one thing that convinced you, the one thing that you have faith in, you decided not to lead with that, right? you had all this other stuff that was just filler, basically, and just kind of random stuff that kind of supports your position, and then you don't lead with your best stuff.
With the best stuff being the personal experience.
Which is literally what convinced him, what changed him, like what made him accept God.
Yeah. I mean, I think it had an influence on me too, but I think if that's all I had today, I would not believe. Definitely. I really don't think that I would believe. Or at least I'd have a much more difficult time, because it's even in the example I used earlier with independent corroborating an experience, I feel like I would need to have more.
Yeah.
I feel like the intelligent design arguments are the strongest, in my opinion. So it's kind of funny that if this guy presented those arguments and then the strongest one was the personal experience, that sounds a little funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it always comes last as sort of like a last resort, some sort of unfalsifiable experience. Like, if you told me that you had an experience and like God spoke to you and like you're actually telling me about it, and like, it may not be falsifiable still, but at least you're like telling me, and like you would cite that, you know, and put it up in the high hierarchy of, you know, what makes you a Christian, then that's all fair and good, in my opinion. You know, I mean, I don't have to accept it, but I can accept it as valid from your point of view, because I didn't experience it, right? So I don't really know.
And for me, I think the way that I approach it is I began rebuilding my theism at a very high level. So beginning with the simple proposition that God exists. That's kind of where I restarted from. And then gradually, and I'm still going through this process, explored theism at a lower and lower level, like a more and more specific level. Like, okay, what kind of God is this? How do I think reality compares to this particular belief about
So
it?
when you said you started from God exists, that was just from a sort of general theistic point of view. You didn't necessarily plug in like the Christian God.
Yeah, definitely. Although, like, I think very quickly I came to the conclusion that at the very least, we would expect there to be some kind of record of God doing things, if he's real and if he does things in the world. And maybe the Bible is part of that record. So I think I don't really know what my point was in that, but I started at a high level, and I thought, well, if this is true, then we probably should see some evidence somewhere. And so that kind of led into the more specific exploration of theism, which I'm still doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's how I kind of thought of it too, that if God was interactive in reality, the Bible, it is the external witness, and then the internal witness, as I was trying to allude to, the Holy Spirit. Jesus said, His Spirit will bear witness with your spirit that you're the children of God. It's not an everyday thing. You wake up and it says, oh, you're a child of God, but it happens at some point with the believer, and it is subjective, to a degree, and what would it be? What would a Christian life be without some experience with God, personally? And and I'm sure a lot of people will testify that have had God work in their life, that He does it oftentimes very personally. He doesn't do it on a street corner for everyone to see, but He does it for an individual. It's for you, and it wasn't for any public praise so much as just something He was answering for you.
Well, I think that's kind of a challenge for Christians, because like, the main thing about Christianity isn't to scientifically prove God. Like, that's not the main thing. The main thing is the gospel. The main thing is personal transformation, self-sacrifice for the sake of others, placing your hope in heaven, not in this like world that's decaying and whatever. Like these are the main things for a Christian to be considering. Not so much like I have to go out and prove God scientifically. Like that's kind of touched on a little bit, but that's not the thing. You know, that's not the core of Christianity. So when you have these conversations though with atheists, you're kind of stuck. You have to try and go that route. You have to try and establish God in a more scientific way or an objective way. I think a trap that people get into is they go too far in that direction. At least from a Christian point of view, they go too far in that direction. Or at least so far, that they forget what their faith is actually supposed to accomplish.
Amen.
I
Yeah.
actually had a moderator at the Christian apologetics community on Google Plus. He stepped down because he felt like he needed to focus more on the message of Christianity and his personal development.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. The scripture says, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, not by hearing the philosophical or argumentation or the scientific proof.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Tom took off. I know. I
Yeah.
think that was the first time I been in a chat with him. He seemed pretty cool. So, Cliff was a cool guy, and he's always cool too. So you got some good people in here tonight. I know you said you were going to go to bed quite a while ago, so I don't want to keep you up either, man. I think it was about an hour ago you said you were headed off to bed, and then everyone showed up. Oh, no problem. Yeah, Brandon said he's got company in the room right now, so he just went on mute.
Yeah, sorry, man. Yeah, I'm gonna have to head to bed, but
Yeah, I figured.
yeah, this turned out to be a pretty good conversation.
Yeah. Hey, I love the way you do your hangouts, and you keep a very calm demeanor and very level-headed, and I like your contemplation. So, yeah, man, cool. Hey, you have a good night, brother.
All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.